How commercetools enables true headless commerce. This is a talk by Ivo Bronsveld, my fellow Dutchie, and he works at commercetools. He discusses how commercetools generally works with its overview, how its API works, and after that, he goes into how to compose an architecture for commerce for the future. So, have fun with this talk, and over to you, Ivo.
Hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here and to talk a bit about commercetools and how it really enables true headless commerce here at Vue Storefront Summit for 2021. Before I dive into the specifics though, I would like to explain a bit about myself, why I'm here, and what I do actually at commercetools. So, my name is Ivo Bronsveld. I'm the head of integrations at commercetools, which means that I'm responsible for all things to do with third-party integrations, our technology partnerships, in the broadest sense of the word. So I've worked closely with Vue Storefront while they were building the integration and getting them listed on our integration marketplace and things like that. And I'm very excited to be here and talk a bit about the commercetools and Vue Storefront combination, why it's great, and why it empowers you to be truly headless. All right. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about a couple of things. First, I want to talk a tiny bit about commercetools and what our ideas are, what the vision is behind what we're doing. Then I want to dive into a bit more specifically as why commercetools fits in the headless space so nicely. Take a bit of a deep dive, actually show you all the different touch points and all the different things that as a developer you would be working with and how, all these moving parts of the platform fit together. And then finally, I want to take a bit of a step back and look at the broader concept of composable commerce and how commercetools fits into that. All right, so introducing commercetools. It shouldn't come as a surprise for many of you, although it might date myself a bit, but I would say we've seen a lot of this happen over the years, is that the standard, very basic catalog sales have become more and more complex over time, right? More and more things have been added. It might have been a blog, it might have been more experience focused, and now we're in the point where we're adding all the omnichannel, a complete omnichannel commerce, unified commerce, right? Where all the different touch points are connected and where you really have to brick and mortar, online, everything is combined. Now, that obviously increased the complexity over time. And you can actually see a similar kind of evolution in the different commerce platforms. So the traditional, the basic the commerce platforms where it all started, they've been around for quite a while, and they were really focused on purely, the commerce system was everything. And you see over time that more and more the platforms got cut up into smaller pieces. So the headless is the first time where you see an actual separation between the, let's say, the front end and the more back-end services. And now with commercetools, you're really looking at a more microservices-based setup. So completely separated and completely independent from other systems, making it possible to do that composable commerce that I mentioned just before. Now, this evolution is obviously not necessarily easy. It's not easy to do for every type of customer. But what we're trying to do at commercetools is to give that platform to our customers that is basically comparable to what an Amazon or a Zalando or an Alibaba has built in-house, right? And it's not always easy to do. So we're trying to actually make this available so that everybody can compete and have the same kind of technology that they have. So now that you kind of know a bit about what commercetools is looking to do and what our vision is, let's have a closer look at why commercetools fits into that headless and microservices setup. The USPs of commercetools that I've written down in this specific slide, and you can see the letters MACH already clearly, MACH. It stands for a certain philosophy. It's also, as commercetools, we founded the MACH Alliance, which is a industry-wide organization that helps educate customers specifically on the concepts of this and why this is a great thing. But what it comes down to is that the platform has been built up according to the microservices principles, right? So what this means for us is that our teams are working independently of one another, building specific parts of the platform. They can deploy these things independently and it basically gives them a lot of agility. The concept of microservices also comes back for customers specifically. So it's really set up to use your own microservices and APIs in there as well. But I'll explain that in a bit more later if we go into the deep dive. Now, the other aspect there is API first, API only. Like if we go back these few slides here, you see that APIs have in most cases been a bit of an afterthought, while in the case of commercetools, these APIs have always been there from the beginning. Like we've always been headless. There's never been a front end. There's, the only way to actually use the platform is by using the APIs and not anything else, right? There's no real other way to communicate with the platform. Now, the other aspect of Mock, right, is it's cloud native. So that means that commercetools is a completely multi-tenant SaaS platform. So the code and everything is completely the same for every one of our customers. It has all the load balancing and all the beautiful things that cloud enables you to do. And all of that is, let's say, out of the box as well. Now, all of these things together enable headless. Headless in the more, let's say, the modern post-web era. So whether that is connected devices or what some of our customers do with connected cars even, or it could also even imply that you could do things in the old world, right? The POS systems, the displays in the store. All of these things are possible using a platform like commercetools because of the API first approach, because we're in the cloud, microservices, all of these things enable a complete flexibility when it comes to the different channels that you're using, and all of these things built for speed, right? It's all about agility and flexibility and innovation that our customers can do. Now, two other things I would say that are still important. Being API first means we're completely programming language agnostic. We have about 10 different SDKs, but even if there's your SDK of your choice isn't in there, doesn't mean it doesn't work, right? It's a standard API that you can connect to and that you can use. So that's certainly a huge benefit. And another thing that I do want to point out is the fact that we use this microservices-based setup and that we're obviously a multi-tenant cloud-based setup means that we can do a lot of different deployments over time, meaning that you get a lot of different releases per year purely without any upgrades. You just get them as soon as they're available. We make sure that the APIs are compatible, obviously, but the deployment of those kind of things like the upgrades are effectively a thing of the past, which is great. All right, so I mentioned something about the technology just to have a bit of a closer look at the different components that we're using. Like on top, you see the different UIs. So there's a business user tooling, there's your own UIs that you built on top of it. SDKs, obviously optional, but that you could use. Then there's two APIs that you can see there, JSON and GraphQL. So we have both. GraphQL is about 95% coverage of the all of the JSON, like the standard APIs. And it's a way to communicate with the platform as well. So it depends a bit on what you're looking to do, but both are available. Now, these APIs in the end are implemented in what you see there, Scala. So that's what we use to create the actual platform. This is obviously the shared layer, right? That's shared between our customers. That code is the same for everyone. Same goes for the provisioning infrastructure, cloud infrastructure as well. And then you see a persistence layer. The persistence layer there, that's unique per customer, obviously, or actually I should say per project. And that is where the data is actually stored. Now you see two things. You see the MongoDB, which is basically the write and read kind of database. So that's where you would store things like cards, etc. And then there's an Elastic search index, which is an optimized read-only version, basically, of MongoDB. So we use that for things like the products that you would display on the page. So making sure that that's fast enough and that that's more performant than the standard, let's say, database. All right, so let's take a deep dive into the platform and how all of these moving parts kind of fit together. So first I want to show you a bit of the commerce functionality overview. Like in the beginning, I mentioned something about this evolution of the commerce platforms and that things kind of got split up a bit more and more. That's what you can see here as well. Like commercetools deals with everything commerce, and that's it, right? There's a couple of things in there that might be also done by other systems, like maybe order management, for example. But in the basics, like the platform contains everything you would need in order to build a modern commerce site. It has things around customers, so it has CRM capabilities, it has product catalogs, so PIM capabilities. Like I mentioned, order management. Order management is part of what commercetools does as well. There's things around promotions. So all of these things are available for everyone. And whether or not you use these APIs or these functionalities is completely up to you. And I'll explain that in a bit more detail later, like how you could use those things to your advantage. But just to show like the menu, if you will, of all the different endpoints and things that are available that you can use to build your site, this is pretty much a good overview of all the things that are in there. All right, so as a developer, what are the different touch points of the platform that you will be working with or that you will be interacting with? Like, first of all, there's this list of the different APIs, the SDKs, and the GraphQL. So that's the actual interfacing with the platform. You're communicating with the platform. In there is and then there's the Merchant Center, I should say. Merchant Center, business tooling, you do some developer tasks in there, but it also would be the day-to-day kind of management, setting prices, setting promotions. So this is the tool that the e-commerce managers in the company would be using more. There's two other things that you could consider to be a touch point or a starting point, I suppose. Like there's Sunrise. Sunrise is our demo setup. So it has a front end, it has a data set as well. But considering we're talking here about the Vue Storefront setup, I would definitely recommend looking at that rather than necessarily taking the demo, although the data that we provide as part of that would be probably a good starting point to set up the environment. Finally, as the head of integrations, I do want to mention integrations. Like we have the integration marketplace that can be used to find third-party integrations that you might need, payment providers. The Vue Storefront is there listed there, but there might be CMS, whatever you can think of, it probably will be there. The idea there is that these integrations are available where you need them, or there's documentation. It depends a bit on the type of setup, but at the very least, it helps you get started building a proper integrated kind of environment and setup. All right, so before we dive into this, I want to take a moment to just show you some of the aspects of the platform that are helpful to know. So let's start here. You see at the docs.commercetools.com URL. This is where our API documentation is available, and it's completely public. So it's available for everyone to see, and you can just browse the different aspects of the platform, the different API calls that you can make. So it's kind of structured in the same way, right? We have the product catalog, there's pricing, discounts, so the promotions part, there's the cards, etc. Now, this is a good starting point for everyone, especially because it also provides the getting started tutorial. So it shows you how to set up a trial account. So everybody can set up a trial account if they want and use it for 60 days. It's one of the benefits, I suppose, of being a completely cloud-hosted thing. So we can set this up quite easily. And here you could immediately create an environment. And this is where you see like the Sunrise data set that you could be using to actually create an environment and create the data in there, have the products in there, and use that. So this would be a good starting point if you want to play around with the platform. So if you, after I'm done talking, of course, feel free to go here and create your project and try it out yourselves. So let's have a look at the different APIs and explore those a bit more. One of the things I mentioned before is that there's a lot of flexibility in how you use the platform. Best way to show that is if I go to the carts endpoint. I really like this one. And then it says here, create a cart, right? So if we're creating a cart, it says, please provide the cart draft to this specific endpoint. If you're posting to this specific endpoint, provide the cart draft object as part of the request, and then you'll get a cart object back. So if you click here, we get the description of what's in there. And if you quickly just scan all of this, you'll see that there's basically one thing that's required and everything else is optional, meaning currency, we need to know obviously what the currency is of the cart, but everything else is something you could do later or that you don't have to do at all. And one of these flexible kind of ways where you could use commercetools is when it comes to, for example, with inventory. So is commercetools, does it know anything about whether or not a product is in stock? If you click on this one, you see the different aspects or the different flags, I suppose, of this enumeration that you could use. So the basic one is none, meaning that no matter what happens, commercetools will add this product to the cart and it doesn't do any validations. Then there's a track only, which basically says we only look if there's an inventory entry record, and we don't care what the actual value of that field is. And then finally, with reserve on order, it is actually saying, okay, we really care about this number and it should be greater than 0, otherwise you can't add it to the cart. Now, what this means for you as a developer or as a customer is that you can set commercetools to be either leading for inventory information, or you can use another system, right? Another microservice or another API that actually tells something about whether or not a product is available. So that's a great example of this flexibility within commercetools that applies to taxes, that applies even to whether or not products exist. So there's something around line items and custom line items. Line items are effectively products that you add to the cart that are available inside commercetools. So commercetools knows that this product exists. On the other hand, there's custom line items where you can just basically provide all this information directly to us. So rather than saying my product is ID 123, here we go, pick it directly from the product. You can also provide all this information to us. And that means that product information doesn't even have to be stored inside commercetools. And that's one of those ways where that flexibility comes in, and where that composable commerce almost comes in the way you would deal with the information and how commercetools handles this. All right, so let's start with the different APIs. So if you look here, as soon as you created your test account, there's this site called Impacts where you can have basically an API playground. You can also do all kinds of import and exports, and there's a GraphQL IDE built in as well. Using either of those can give you some examples of how to interact with the platform. As you can see here, there's an endpoint called products. I can query, update, create, right? You can do all that directly from the API playground here after you logged in and you selected your project. And as you can see, I can also provide some queries here. So if I click go here right now, you'll see that right now it returns one product. And as you can see, because we're using the products endpoint, it also provides the current as well as the draft data. So the data that's being edited by an editor or by a user in the Merchant Center would be a draft until it's published, right? That's the kind of idea. There's also an endpoint actually with the product projections, which is effectively the same, but it only provides the data that you're selecting here. So it's either current or staged, right? So if we select current, we don't get that entire wrapper around it, and we just get the optimized information. And this is actually using that Elasticsearch index that I talked about before, right? So this is where that read-only kind of access comes into play. So the projections is the read-only version, and you can see that here, right? There's no update. And in here with the products, there is an update and a delete, etc. All right. Another way is GraphQL. Not sure if everybody's familiar with what GraphQL is. But GraphQL is another way to basically interact with the APIs, and it allows you to be a bit more specific, almost like the SQL queries of the past, I suppose, where you would just say select a couple of columns rather than the entire data model. That's the same thing you can do here. So if you compare these two API calls, where here I would just get everything, including all the different prices, etc. I can also ask the platform using GraphQL specifically only to provide the attributes. So if we run this, you'll see that it still returns the product with the key set to test 1, 2, 3, but now it just provides only the attributes. And those attributes are also available in here, but they're available in a giant JSON structure. But here you'll see the same attributes come back that you'll see here. And that allows you to be a bit more specific on the type of information you want to get back, making it also a bit more performant because you're only fetching what you really need. And that's specifically in front-end situations. I think that would be a good thing to look into and explore. Another touch point I mentioned was the SDK. So here is the SDK for Node. It has, basically all the documentation on how to use it and how to set it up. It has a bunch of different middlewares that you stack on top of each other. So it's also something that in theory you could use with other APIs, but specifically it works for us in this way. It allows you to create the middleware that you need for the authentication, like the tokens, etc. And then provide some direct access to the APIs by executing the requests and, etc. With Vue Storefront, all this stuff is taken care of, right? Like that entire implementation has all this already, so wouldn't worry about it too much. But with this here, I would definitely recommend to look at this Node.js SDK, because it also comes with a bunch of command line tools that could be helpful, such as like product exporters, right? And things like that. So there's definitely some value to exploring this and seeing, hey, is this, there's a bunch of tools in there that we could use, like generating discount codes, for example, if you want to create a bulk of those. Like there's a bunch of these tools directly in the SDK. It's as a good starting point. Now, the final touch point, I suppose, or that I want to highlight is the so-called the Merchant Center. So the Merchant Center here is the UI that you'll be using, mostly like the business users will be using. But as a developer, there's a couple of aspects of that as well. So first of all, there's the settings of the project, right? Setting up the business, if you will. So the currencies that are being used, languages, etc. Those are the kind of things that you can set up directly from here. And then there's also the capability to create product types directly from here. So product types, the different data structure, that is something that you always have to think about. So like the things like localized, colors or names and details. And this is obviously a talk of about an hour on its own to really go through all of this, but it just shows you that this is one way where you would be using that. For most of the developer stuff, it's specifically around creating the API clients that you might want to use to connect to the platform and creating the product types. Everything else that you might want to do is probably directly like linked in here. So things around configuration and the APIs that you might want to call. That's one way you could do that, or changing the behaviors, right? All right, so having said that, let's have a look at the other part. So I already mentioned commercetools being multi-tenant. That means that making customizations isn't always easy, or isn't as straightforward as it might have been in, let's say, the olden days. So on the left-hand side, you see the more conventional approach to doing modifications to the platform. So the implementation of, let's say, specific business logic would be done inside the platform. With commercetools, that's not possible because of the fact that, first of all, the code is the same for everyone. Plus, you want to have an upgrade done without any hassle, right? So what we've done is we clearly separated out by using a couple of standard patterns that are available to use, and those will always work no matter what we do with the platform, obviously. Now, an example of those, I have two examples actually. There's one that's called events. So that's subscription-based, where you can subscribe to specific events. What we do is we post those events to a standard like cloud-based messaging queue. So like an order created message will be posted, or customer updated event. And then from that point, you can read that directly with your code, right? And that's just reading from that queue and then connecting to any third-party system. This is the way you would do order confirmation emails, for example. You can subscribe to this event. That event will be posted in the message queue, let's say pubs up on Google. You can then read from it and then do anything that you're looking to do. Most important part here, it's asynchronous, right? So it's not real time. It doesn't provide any feedback to the user on the site. For that, there's something what we call API extensions. So that's still a possibility, but this is mostly in the specific flow of the API call. So what I mean there is, let's say you're adding a product to the cart and you want to make sure that the product is in stock, or that you like it says in the example, like add a required insurance or something, or make sure that you don't order too many in one go. The way to do that is to set up an API extension, which gets triggered before we save the data to the actual database. And that triggers like a cloud function. And in there, you can return the result being yes or no, or you can return some update actions that you might want to do to say, change the product rather than 10 that you're adding to the cart, change it to 2. That's basically the idea. And those are the two patterns that we see quite often. And on top of that, there's obviously ways where you can use like custom microservices or middleware before actually connecting to commercetools, which is also a very common one, but that's actually completely outside of the platform, obviously. All right. Finally, just an example of what the architecture or deployment kind of would look like on GCP in this case. So with the Vue Storefront, or the way you want to deploy any front end, you can do that using any type of front end technology. It doesn't have to be GCP. It can be on the Vue Storefront servers themselves, like it in the end, it doesn't really matter. But the way we see it is that commercetools is just, using or being called by different parts of the cloud infrastructure. So you can use an API gateway like EPG in this example, and then on the other side with the different patterns I mentioned before, we'll use things like PubSub or Cloud Functions or maybe the Cloud Scheduler functionality provided by GCP. And that just gives you a bit of a bigger picture kind of overview of how front end and all these moving parts kind of fit together. All right. Almost at the end. Finally, I want to talk a tiny bit about how you would go about like adopting this composable commerce kind of mindset and how we see that and how we kind of fit into that. So first of all, like I mentioned before, commercetools has always been completely headless. So when it comes to front end and creating that customer experience or even like using some kind of backend tooling or sorts, like it doesn't matter for us, right? We're completely flexible. You can use Vue Storefront, obviously. You can use your own front-end frameworks. You can use a more traditional CMS like an Adobe or a Magnolia, for example, or use a completely headless content system. And in the end, what you need to do is bring it all together. So that's why it here says backend for front-end as recommended. We see a lot of our customers do that so that they don't connect directly to commercetools, but basically use the backend for front-end almost as a proxy to commercetools. In the end, it allows you to do a bit more in the future, right? You could, if you have a backend for front-end or kind of middleware in that sense, you could create your own microservices and add those to that, but ultimately the sky's the limit there. Finally, just to give you an example, if you look at how all of these different parts fit together, like the composable part of this is that you have multiple providers providing some information. So if you take this page as an example, like commercetools could be providing the categories. We could be, we provide the name, the description, the SKU, maybe the reviews. We can say something about price or stock levels, although I also mentioned, right, that's not necessarily required because that could come from a third-party system. Add to cart, obviously, I would say that's definitely one thing that commercetools does as a commerce system. Then there's a capability search, right? You could use commercetools as the search engine, or you could use a dedicated search engine for that specifically. Same goes for things around the images, like the product images or maybe banners. Like the more you start talking about marketing or traditional like CMS stuff, that's where they would take over. So they would provide that part of the page, although they could also do the categories, right? They could provide the main navigation actually. And then finally, where Vue Storefront fits in is the overall rendering and the overall look and feel. That will be provided by a solution like Vue Storefront. And I'm pretty sure they're going to talk about that in the next session. So be sure to check that out of kind of how that all fits together. But this is kind of the way you should think about this, where commercetools could provide different aspects of the overall setup, but we don't necessarily have a very strong opinion on what it is that you need to do. Well, I would say add to cart is pretty much the standard kind of stuff that we would do, but everything else could be optional in a certain way or could be optimized or tailored to the specific requirements that you might have. All right, so there's now some time for a Q&A in the Hopin chat, so feel free to do that. I'll be there to answer any of the questions you might have. And other than that, I would say thank you for listening and taking the time to explore a bit more about commercetools. And if there's any questions, feel free to reach out. You can use LinkedIn, obviously, or you can send me an email directly. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you in the chat.